End Times with me, Pastor Rick Winter. So glad you could join me tonight for this program, Deciphering the End Times. All right, as promised last week, I would be looking now at the book of Daniel. Now, we won't be doing all of Daniel. We'll be primarily focusing on his prophecies as it relates to the time of the end. But for those of you who have gotten a notice, I plan to meet with another brother of mine. His name is Elihu, but unfortunately, because of technical difficulties, we won't be having that program. It would have been an interesting chat, as we would have been looking at Revelation. He has a very unique way at looking at Revelation, and so I just wanted to introduce that to you, my listening audience. But because of technical difficulties, I won't be hearing that program tonight. But like I promised last week, we will be looking in the book of Daniel. And we will look at that. We will begin tonight at Daniel chapter 2, as I have said, that as it relates to Daniel, I won't be looking so much at all the chapters in Daniel, but I'll be looking at those as it relates to, or it points to, the time of the end. Now we go to Daniel chapter 2, and it reads, in the second year, and let me use the New English translation, but let's begin nonetheless, right? In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had many dreams. His mind was disturbed, and he suffered insomnia. The King James says his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. The king issued an order to summon the magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, and wise men in order to explain his dreams to him. So they came and awaited the king's instruction. The king told them, I've had a dream, and I'm anxious to understand the dream. The wise men replied to the king, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will disclose its interpretation. The king replied to the wise men, My decision is firm. If you do not inform me of both the dream and its interpretation, you will be dismembered, and your homes reduced to rubble. But if you can disclose the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts, a reward, and considerable honor. So disclose to me the dream and its interpretation. The king replied, I know for sure that you are attempting to gain time. Verse 7, they again replied, Let the king inform us of the dream, then we will disclose its interpretation. The king replied, I know for sure that you are attempting to gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you don't inform me of the dream, there is only one thing that is going to happen to you. For you have agreed among yourselves to report to me something false and deceitful until such time as things might change. So tell me the dream, and I will have confidence that you can disclose its interpretation. The wise men replied to the king, There is no man on earth who is able to disclose a king's secret. For no king, regardless of his position and power, has ever requested such a thing from any magician, astrologer, or wise man. What the king is asking is too difficult, and no one exists who can disclose it to the king except the gods, but they don't live among mortals. Because of this, the king got furiously angry and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So a decree went out, and the wise men were about to be executed. They also sought Daniel and his friends so that they could be executed. Then Daniel spoke with prudent counsel to Arioch, who was in charge of the king's executioners and who had gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. He inquired of Arioch, the king's deputy, "Why is the decree from the king so urgent?" Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went in and requested the king to grant him time that he might disclose the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his home and informed his friends Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the matter. He asked them to pray for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends would not be destroyed along with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then in a night vision, the mystery was revealed to Daniel. So Daniel praised the God of heaven, saying, "Let the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. He changes times and seasons, disposing some kings and establishing others. He gives wisdom to the wise, he imparts knowledge to those with understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light resides with him. O God of my fathers, I acknowledge and glorify you, for you have bestowed wisdom and power on me. Now you have enabled me to understand what I requested from you, for you have enabled me to understand the king's dilemma." Then Daniel went to see Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He came and said to him, "Don't destroy the wise men of Babylon. Escort me to the king, and I will disclose the interpretation to him." So Arioch quickly ushered Daniel into the king's presence, saying to him, "I have found a man from the captives of Judah who can make known the interpretation to the king." The king then asked Daniel, whose name was also Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream that I saw, as well as its interpretation?" Daniel replied to the king, "The mystery that the king is asking about is such that no wise man, astrologers, magicians, or diviners can possibly disclose to the king. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the times to come. The dream and the visions you had while you were lying on your bed are as follows. As for you, O king, while you were on your bed, your thoughts turned to future things. The revealer of mysteries had made known to you what will take place. As for me, this mystery was revealed to me not because I possess more wisdom than any other living person, but so that the king may understand the interpretation and comprehend the thoughts of your mind. You, O king, were watching as a great statue, one of impressive size and extraordinary brightness, was standing before you. Its appearance caused alarm. You, O king, were watching as a great statue, one of impressive size and extraordinary brightness, was standing before you. Its appearance caused alarm. As for that statue, its head was of fine gold, its chest and arm were of silver, its belly and thighs are of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet were partly iron and partly clay. You were watching as a stone was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its iron and clay feet, breaking them in pieces. Then the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were broken in pieces without distinction, and became like chaff from the summer threshing floor that the wind carries away. Not a trace of them could be found, but the stone that struck the statue became a large stone that filled the entire earth. This was the dream. Now we will see forth before the king its interpretation. You, O king, are the king of kings. The God of heaven has granted you sovereignty, power, strength, and honor. Wherever human beings, wild animals, and birds of the sky live, he has given them into your power. He has given you authority over them all. You are the head of gold. Now after you, another kingdom will arise, one inferior to yours. Then a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule in all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom, one strong like iron, just like iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and as iron breaks in pieces all of these metals, so it will break in pieces and crush the others. In that you are seeing feet and toes, partly wet clay and partly iron. So this will be a divided kingdom. Some of the strength of iron will be in it, for you saw iron mixed with clay. In that the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, the latter stages of this kingdom will be partly strong and partly fragile. And in that you saw iron mixed with clay, so people will be mixed with one another without adhering to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will raise up an everlasting kingdom that will not be destroyed, and a kingdom that will not be left to another people. It will break in pieces and bring about the demise of all these kingdoms, but it will stand forever. You saw that a stone was cut from a mountain, but not by human hands. It smashed the iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold in pieces. The great God has made known to the king what will occur in the future. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is reliable. Then King Nebuchadnezzar bowed down with his face to the ground and paid homage to Daniel. He gave orders to offer sacrifice and incense to him. The king replied to Daniel, "Certainly, your God is a God of gods, Lord of kings, and revealer of mysteries, for you are able to reveal this mystery." Then the king elevated Daniel to high position and bestowed on him many marvelous gifts. He granted him authority over the entire province of Babylon and made him the main prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon. Daniel himself served in the king's court. Before I get into this, before I do the interpretation, or while I get in it, I will say something as what I did on Thursday night on a different program. I will share. Now, in this passage, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, another pagan king. Let me firstly apologize again for those of you just joining. I know on the notice that went out earlier today, it states that I'll be having a discussion with my brother Eliyahu, sorry. And we would have been he has a program where he does a literal interpretation of Revelation. Unfortunately, because of technical difficulties, we won't be having that program tonight. I will give notice when that is possible. But also, I promised last week that I'll be looking at the book of Daniel, primarily the prophecies, as it relates to the time of the end. So here we are tonight. We're looking at Daniel chapter 2, and we're looking at Nebuchadnezzar's dream and the interpretation that the king received from Daniel. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, in his second year, had a dream. It was a dream that disturbed him. As the scripture says, he dreamed dreams. It disturbed his spirit. His sleep left him. It was a troublesome dream. Similar to Pharaoh, Pharaoh had a dream, disturbed him, he woke up. But in this case, Pharaoh went back to sleep and had a similar dream to the one he had before. In this case, Nebuchadnezzar's his sleep left him. It was gone. It was finished. He called his magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, and wise men. These were men that stood before the king. The wise men, as a matter of fact, are Chaldeans. King James says Chaldeans. These were the men that stood before the king. No, I said something similar to what I'm about to say on Thursday night when I did my other program, The Open Book. After Pharaoh had the dream, or the dreams, he called his wise men. They could not interpret the dream. In that story, though, Pharaoh remembered what the dream was. In this story, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't. However, like Pharaoh, and I guess it's a thing done by the pagan kings in the ancient times, they had with them magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, and the Chaldeans. What were the roles of these? What are the roles of these person or their job description? Now, we said he had magicians. These are diviners. And diviners are a person who access information or gives divine information from the unseen realm to the natural world, but they do it in an illegal way. God is not their source, hence why I said it's illegal. So the magicians are sorcerers, and this is where I want people. I'm very specific with words, based on my understanding of the power of words, the power of the spoken word, and an understanding of the realm of the spirit, the unseen realm. So when I hear people talking about magic, that's something that I dismiss based on its source. Then you have astrologers. Astrologers are necromancers. They are into enchanting. And so their JD is more, again, they are in the realm, the unseen realm. But necromancers speak of somebody who, again, get information from the realm of the spirit, but not from God. The thing about an astrologer, though, is that they study the stars. Now, there's a difference between astronomy and astrology. An astronomer, in astronomy, it's a science. It's a science. Astrology is based on magic. It's information that is sourced from spirits, demons, fallen angels. Then that's not from God, right? And then you have sorcerers. These are people who practice witchcraft. They conjure up information some other way. And then you had the Chaldeans. These were, in a sense, Nebuchadnezzar's council, the chief council, because they're called wise men. Not that everybody there, the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers. And so these, you have to understand this. This was a world of the gods. These people believed in the gods. Everything for them as it relates to life, politics, family life, occupation, money, health, sickness, death, has to do with the gods. And so having these men around him, they were to be in touch with the gods to tell him what is. Hence, you understand Nebuchadnezzar's anxiety because he wanted to understand the dream, which is what verse 3 says. He said, I have a dream and I'm anxious to understand the dream. Now they were waiting for him to tell them the dream. However, he didn't remember because he had insomnia. And so he got upset. And so he gave an order that the wise men, that all of these magicians, sorcerers, astrologers, they were supposed to be killed because they're asking him, but he doesn't remember. And they go as far as says, telling the king in verse 7, they said, let the king inform us of the dream so we can disclose its interpretation. You see, it is key. They couldn't disclose the information because it needed a familiar spirit to hear what he dreamt, because the dream came from a source that is above and beyond principalities, powers, etc. Like I said on Thursday night, as Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream, was that God blocked it. And Joseph said it. He said, God has revealed to you what is to come. He has decreed this, and it must come to pass. So Nebuchadnezzar had a similar moment in time. Now, Daniel, because of his position, he too was a wise man. Now, when I say wise man, it doesn't mean that he's doing what they did. Now, let's get to the main part of this passage. When he went to the king, he shared with the king what the king saw in the dream. He said to the king, you were watching as a great statue, one of impressive size and thickness, was standing before you. The King James says, thou, O king, sawest and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and the form thereof was terrible. And so he described the metals that were on, well, not all metals, but the metal and non-metal that made up this image. He said the statue, the head of the statue was fine gold, its chest and arms were of silver, its belly and thighs were of bronze, its legs were of iron, and its feet were partly iron and partly clay. These things are important. Then he said to him, you were watching as a stone was cut out, not by human hands. It struck the statue on its iron and clay feet, breaking them in pieces. This is key, because we're going to get back to right here, verse 34, because we need to take note where the stone hit the statue first. Then the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were broken in pieces without distinction, and became like chaff on the summer threshing floor. No trace of them was found, but the stone that struck the statue became a large mountain that fills the entire earth. This was the dream. So he told the king the dream. Now he's going to give him interpretation. The head, as he said, is the gold. And he used images for Nebuchadnezzar to understand. He says, you are the head, because of how God gave him authority over human beings and wild animals. Then he said, after you another kingdom will arise, one inferior to yours. Then a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rise in all the earth. Then he mentions in verse 40, there will be a fourth kingdom, one strong like iron, and just like iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and as iron breaks in pieces all metals, so it will break in pieces and crush the others. verse 41, he said that in that you are seeing feet and toes, that's partly iron and partly clay. It was a divided kingdom. Some of the strength of it will be iron, for you saw iron mixed with clay. In that the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, the latter stages of this kingdom will be partly strong and partly weak. If you realize Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, he gave an explanation. He didn't explain about the silver, didn't explain about the bronze, didn't explain about the iron. But here, he was given an explanation as it relates to the 10 toes. He gave an explanation about the 10 toes. Then, verse 43, he said, "And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." It's an interesting statement. He never explained about the silver. He never explained about the bronze. Never explained about the iron. But here he's explaining about the iron and the clay because it is significant. And we have to understand, remember, this is literature. And the writer of any literature, in sending you a message, will focus on what he or she will do. They will focus on the thing that they're really sending you the message about. So when we go to scripture and we see stuff like these, verse 42 to about 45 of Daniel 2, pay close attention. Like I said, he didn't explain anything about the iron, didn't explain anything about the bronze, didn't explain anything about the silver, but he was explaining about the iron and the clay. And I want to read verse 43 one more time. "And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." Verse 44, "And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." Now, why did Daniel explain this portion? Firstly, as you think about the iron mixed with clay, right? The iron mixed with clay. He said 10 toes. Remember, Daniel is talking or speaking about kingdoms. The head of gold is the Babylonian kingdom. The arms and bust of silver is the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. The belly and thighs of bronze is Greece. And as a matter of fact, you go to thighs, still brass, because Greece was broken into 4 pieces after the death of Alexander the Great. But there were only 2 prominent kingdoms that stood out of the 4. It was the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. And as we get later in Daniel, we will talk about these 2 kingdoms that really stood out in the Grecian Empire. Then you had legs of iron. Now, there's a toss-up. Traditionally, people have said that this is the kingdom the Roman Empire. But of late, some scholars are giving credence to the fact that the legs of iron speaks of not so much a, a kingdom, but a religion. And we will look at that. We'll get into all that debate tonight. Because here's the thing, before I go forward, especially looking at verse 42, 43, 44, and 45. I have my position on these things. I have my personal position. However, I'm a balanced teacher. And I want to present to you all the possible positions that are there, the possible views, so that you can understand. But I do have my own personal view or position on the thing. Daniel 2:43 says, "And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they will mingle themselves with the seed of men." First thing, the Babylonian kingdom is made up of men, human beings, Adamic race, right? So is the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. So is the Grecian Empire. And so is the Iron Empire. Yeah? Now, when we get to verse 43, there's something that is critical here. Whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. What is there? Which is which? We will talk about. But that's not so insignificant. The thing is, whereas you see iron mixed with miry clay, they will mingle themselves with the seed of men. This is the King James Version. The New English Translation states, "And in that you saw iron mixed with clay, so people will be mixed with one another without adhering to one another." The NIV states, "So people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixed with clay." The Young's literal translation says, "They are mixing themselves with the seed of men. They are not adhering to one another, even as iron mixed with clay." Stretching it out, leaving you in suspense, right? Good. Now, if, and it's not if, we know that the Babylonian Empire, the Medes and the Persians, the Grecians, and traditionally it is said that it's the Roman Empire, but let's work it that way for now. And even if it's what modern scholars are saying, Islam, that's fine. The question out of the passage is this: all of those empires are of human origin, built by humans, run by humans. Humans are the kings. Why though? Verse 43 says, "They will mingle themselves with the seed of men." What's so significant about the 10 Toes Empire? Who are they in the pronoun? Yeah? Who are the they that they mingle themselves with the seed of men? Because it is evident that the Babylonian Empire is made up of human beings, Medes and Persians, modern day Iran, by the way. Babylon is modern day Iraq, Greece, modern day Greece, the Kingdom of Iron, traditionally it's the Roman Empire. Some modern scholars are saying that, not agreeing with the traditional view, they are saying it's Islam, right? I don't have a problem with that because one common thread in all the five, well, it's really four, but as it relates to the iron, as in the legs of iron, two views: Romans, or the Roman Empire, or Islam. My question there is, or the commonality I see with all of these empires, is that they are made up of humans. So why does the scripture says, as it relates to the empire of the 10 toes mixed with iron and clay, why is the pronoun they placed there? They will mingle themselves with the seed of men. Mingle. They will mingle with the seed of men. Why the distinction? Seed of men and the they. The other question is, who are the they that they mingle themselves with the seed of men? What exactly is happening there? Maybe the answer can be found in verse 44. In the days of these kings. The kings that Daniel is speaking of is in the days of the kings over the 10 kingdoms, the 10 toes. So is it that these kings are different from human beings? Is it the kings they're talking about? Because why is there a distinction that they will mingle themselves with the seed of man? It's obvious that they are not humans if they are mingling themselves with the seed of men. That's the thing. That's my conjecture. It is obvious that they aren't humans if they are mingling themselves with the seed of men. Because if they are human, there will be no need to make mention of the fact that they are mingling themselves with the seed of men. And the Bible is precise. It goes to the point where it says seed. Could have simply said mankind, human, but it says seed of men. So it means, my conjecture again, it means that whoever these kings are, that they are after man's seed, as in our genetic makeup. They are after our genes. So something is at play there. Daniel, before the advent of our modern era, was saying something to us, a mystery that many of us didn't see. But with the advent of modern technology, things like genetic engineering, pre-implantation genetics, embryonic stem cell research, biotechnology, We are capable of doing these things. And the thing about this particular passage in Daniel 2, 42, 43, 44, and 45, 44 is giving us a clue. Verse 44 is saying that in the days of these kings, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. The kingdom shall not be left to other people or to another people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. I want to go back to a verse that I made mention of earlier, and I said I need us to focus on it. And it's Daniel 2:34. It says, you were watching as a stone was cut out not by human hands. It struck the statue where on its iron and clay feet, breaking them in pieces. It was afterwards that the other metals were destroyed or broken. But it hit or struck where the iron and the clay was. If we go back to 44, it says, in the days of those kings, it is talking about the 10 toes mixed with iron and clay. It's talking about 10 kingdoms. In other words, it's talking about the end times. That at the return of the Lord, there will be 10 kingdoms that are set up. And the stone, which is symbolic of the kingdom of God, will destroy those 10 kingdoms. So verse 34, this is why I said, let us remember it, because I knew I was coming back to it. The stone that was cut out not by human hands struck the statue on its iron and clay feet, breaking them in pieces. End time, the return of the Lord, the destruction of the 10 kingdoms. Let me give an idea of what the 10 kingdom is. Let's go to Revelation chapter 13. 13 verse 1 says, then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, and its horns, and on its horns, were 10 diadem crowns, and it had a blasphemous name. So the 10 horns are symbolic of 10 kingdoms. Now, let me give you an example. We could still go right here in Daniel, where Daniel speaks of when he was speaking of the little horn. First, there was a single horn that was on one of the animals of Daniel chapter 8, and it's speaking of a kingdom. And when that horn was broken, there were 4 others. So kingdom. So Revelation 13:1 gives us an idea. It says, I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon the horns 10 crowns. So kingdom. So the Daniel 2, 44, 45 passage are the 10 toes mixed with iron and clay are kingdoms. And this is why they were destroyed when the stone was hewn out of the mountain, which is the kingdom of God, the return of Jesus Christ to destroy the end time kingdoms. Because verse 44 says, in the days of these kings. So in other words, let's go back and wrestle with 43. They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. And here's an example I'm going to use. As it is right now, one of the most, there are quite a few number of monarchies around the world. But the most popular for most of us in the West is the English monarchy. Now there's the Queen of England. When I refer to the English monarchy, I'm referring to the Queen of England. Is she human? Yes, she is. In being a human, what makes her different from us? Just her position as a queen. Yes? In other words, she's royalty. And people speak of royal blood. But if you really check, her blood and a common man is the same. She's a human being just as you and I are. But she has an honored position. So, in other words, what I'm saying, if you should get her DNA and your DNA or mine, the possibility is what we're looking for in the DNA, not the possibility, what we're looking for in her DNA, my DNA, and your DNA would be found to prove that we're all human beings. But in this passage, I went there because I want us to understand something. They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. But then verse 44 says, days of these kings. There's something that's not correct about these kings. And I want to get back to something that I shared. Sorry for the break in transmission. As we're speaking, a couple of things are happening in our world. And I'm reading from Human Dignity in a Biotech Century by Charles Colson and Nigel Cameron. The idea of Daniel 2:43 are these things that is happening in our world as we speak. We have had things like cloning, embryo research, germline genetic engineering, the patenting of genes and other human tissues. These are the things. And so Daniel 2:43 is saying to us that we're living in a time of what Aldous Huxley calls a brave new world. So our Bible is pointing us because there is a biotech revolution that's taking place. The revolution that's taking place. And the Daniel 2:43 is saying the same in them mingling themselves. So in other words, they are a different species from the seed of men, which we are. So there's going to be in the future kingdoms, or the kingdoms of the end time, which will be 10 based on Bible prophecy here, there's going to be a mingling of humans and some other species. Hence Daniel referred to they. Do you remember the statement by Jesus in Matthew 24 where he says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be for the coming of the Son of Man. What happened in the days of Noah? Scripture says, Genesis 6, that the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. The sons of God weren't referring to human beings. They were referring to falling angels. Falling angels, sorry. Angels that went rogue. They took wives of the women and produced children. One translation stated that they saw women as fit extensions to raise up children for them. And so that's how the giants came about. So the giants weren't fully human. They were half human, half angels. They were hybrids. Hence God's statement in Genesis 6, about verse 8 and 9, where he states that, where the scripture states that Noah was found perfect. The Hebrew word tamim, it was Noah's genetic makeup God was referring to. Why is that important to all of this? Because hadn't Noah been of pure human stock, or i.e. a seed of man or men, then the enemy could have stopped the coming of the Messiah, who had to be truly human, seed of the woman. Genesis 3:16. The first prophecy, or some refer to as the proto-evangelion. So, this passage is loaded, very pregnant. Now, onto the 10 toes. We're living in a time where the Bible is being fulfilled on a rapid pace. 10 toes is really referring to 10 kingdoms by what verse 44 says, in the days of these kings. So in other words, these kings are the 10 kingdoms. And we use the Revelation 13:1 passage, and I could use a passage also in Daniel because the same imagery is there. So there will be 10 kingdoms. Now, there are 3 very popular views as it relates to the kingdoms of the end of time. There states that there will be a revived Roman Empire. Possibly. There is the belief that the 10 kingdoms will be very Islamic in its nature and makeup. And there is another view that there will be 10 super nations or trade blocs. And these trade blocs will be primarily based on the move for globalism. Already there are one such that is in the makeup already. So let me repeat the 3. There's the views of the traditional view that it is a revived Roman Empire. So most, including me at the time, when the EU came about, I was very interested to watch EU. And even though my view has shifted somewhat, I'm still watching what EU does because the EU is very powerful. And the truth is, it could still play its role because it falls in this other view, not the Islamic view, where the 10 kingdoms will come from primarily Islamic nations. But the 10 kingdoms in this particular view will be 10 supranations made up or are generally looked at as trade blocks that covers every nation on the earth. 10 trade blocks. And I'll share that quickly, and then we wrap up tonight. And next week we dig more in verse 43. All right, what I'll do tonight, I will just briefly look at both, but I've looked at the 43 passage already, and I'll look at the 10 supranations that will make up, well, like I said, there'll be more like trade blocks. For example, there's a look at NAFTA, North America Free Trade Agreement, trade block from Canada all the way to Mexico. Then there's the OAS, anything south of Mexico, including the Caribbean, all the way down to Argentina. That's another trade block. So, and I mentioned EU, so that's 2. China will be all by itself. 3. Russia and the Eastern European blocs. 4. So, and there's more. So 10 kingdoms. Because remember, this didn't say 10 countries, they were kingdoms led by kings. Hence the statement in verse 44 that in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And it was hewn out of the mountain, and the first place it hit was the clay, the iron and the clay, destroying it. So this is verse 34 is really connecting to this. In the days of these kings. So that's where we'll stop tonight. If you have any question, have any comment as based on what I've shared, or there may be some clarity that you okay, you're late, you're lost. What area did you miss out on there, Nadine? Is it everything, or verse 43 and what I mentioned about the 10 kingdoms? All right, let me see how best I can summarize what I've said tonight. So Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and in his dream he dreamt he saw an image. It's like an image of is a statue, but of course it's a statue of a man. The head of the image was gold. The bust, as in the bust and the arms, were silver. Then the belly and the thighs were made up of brass or bronze. The legs were made up of iron, and the feet, that is the toes, there was a mixture of iron and clay. In interpreting the dream, Daniel says that the gold was the kingdom of Babylon, which Nebuchadnezzar was the king at the time. After that kingdom, where the silver would be, which is the chest and the arm, would be the kingdom of Medes and Persian, hence the 2 arms. Then the belly and the thighs was made up of the Grecian Empire, which is modern day Greece. After the death of their first emperor, or the most successful, Alexander the Great, his kingdom was split in four. However, though his kingdom was split in four, shared between his four army generals, there were two who were more dominant. That is the Seleucids Empire and the Ptolemies. Then you go down to the legs of iron. Now, there are two views. The traditional view is that this is the Roman Empire. Modern scholars, though, are saying that it's Islam, right? But then when we go down to the feet, there's the toes, 10 toes, the mixture of iron and clay. Now, verse 44 says to us that the statement, they will mingle themselves with the seed of men. The question is, the pronoun they, who was it speaking of, or who is it speaking of? And why the distinction between the they and the seed of men? The seed of men obviously are human beings. And the kingdoms prior, Babylon, Mede and Persia, Greece, Romans or Islam, they are humans. So why know the distinction in this particular kingdom? Why the distinction by using the pronoun they? Obviously, the pronoun they is speaking of some being, but are they human beings? Couldn't be based on the fact that they are mingling with the seed of men. And as I was saying, the fact that the scriptures in writing, when the author wants you to get something, there's an emphasis, and that's exactly what happened. And so the seed of men are obviously human, but the they mix with they are mingling, so there's a together of two different species. It would mean then that the they are not human beings. And verse 44 kind of answers it by saying, in the days of these kings, the God of heaven sets up a kingdom. Or in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. Now, the kingdom of heaven that verse 34 speak of was a stone that the king saw that was cut out of a mountain without human hands. And when it rolled down, the first part on that image that it hit was where the iron and clay was. And so it destroyed it. So what I was saying is that the kingdom of the iron and clay is an end time 10 empire kingdom. It is set up in the last days, and so the stone that rolls out of the mountain is the stone that destroys this 10 empire or 10 kingdoms of the last days. And so I was just giving a couple. There are three views. There will be more, but I know of three most of all, three very popular ones. And the first is a traditional view that there'll be a revived Roman Empire. Then these are more modern, that the 10 kingdoms are 10 Islamic nations, are made up of 10 Islamic nations. Then you have the other view that states that there will be 10 supranations or trade blocks. So instead of one country, you'll have 3 or 4 countries coming together to form a supranation, a trade block, with one leader over it. And so there'll be 10 of such. And so I use the EU as an example. The EU is made up of countries such as Spain, Portugal, Italy, Germany, France, Greece, Switzerland, Poland, Belgium. So all of those nations came together to form the EU. And despite they have their own presidents and prime ministers, the EU on a whole has a leader over the whole trade bloc. And so I was saying that the possibility is that this is how each of the 10 super nations would look. Yeah, hopefully that helps. All right, thank you for joining me. This has been the program, Deciphering the End Times. Deciphering the End Times comes to you every Sunday at 8:30 p.m. right here on your favorite social media platform, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. I broadcast to you live from Restream, and you can see this program on any of these platforms. If you're on YouTube, I always like to say to you, like, comment, and share. Click the alert button so that you can know when this program is on. Thank you for joining me. This has been the program Deciphering the End Times, where I discuss end time issues. But this series, I'll be looking the book of Daniel. Now, it doesn't mean I'll be looking at all the chapters in Daniel, because not all the chapters speak to the time of the end. And so tonight I began at Daniel chapter 2. We wrapped up at verses 43 and 44, which I'll pick up next week, where I look more in-depthly at the phrase, they mingle themselves with the seed of men, and I will give you a more in-depth look at the 10 kingdoms. So thank you for joining me, and join me on Thursday night at 8:30 for my other program, The Open Book, where I continue our studies in the book of Genesis, and we're at the last 9 chapters, where I am primarily now looking at the life of Joseph, the final main character in the book of Genesis. Thank you for joining me. I'm Pastor Rick Winter. God bless you.